Hello again, BIO178. In this video, I will walk us through the intellectual merit section of our proposals. So the purpose of the intellectual merit section is really you want a reviewer to read the section and say, yes, you know what, we really need to do this work because it's filling a gap of knowledge that we don't currently know, and it's essential that we do know this information, and so yes, we should do this work. So really, when you're writing this intellectual merit section, that's what you're trying, keep that in mind, that's what you're trying to convey to a reviewer. So in this intellectual merit section, you're explicitly describing how this work is new and why it needs to be done. So again, you're laying out in written format for your reviewers, look at this shiny new work I'm proposing, it hasn't been done before and it needs to be done, and this is why. And that's the core of the information you're including in this intellectual merit section. So what you're doing here is describing, or one of the things you should be thinking about to include in this section is describing how your proposed work has the potential to advance knowledge and understanding either within the field, so that can be within the field of molecular ecology or conservation, or even across different fields. Maybe the methods you're proposing can even be used and will be useful for other fields as well. So in ecology, traditional ecology, something like that. So you're making a case for how the work you're proposing is going to be beneficial, not just for your work, but it's going to advance knowledge for the field in general. Another thing you should be thinking about for this section is you should be describing how your proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, and even potentially transformative concepts. So this image I have here, you may have heard left brain, right brain, one side of your brain is tied into the creativity side. So for me, for example, if someone told me to draw a brain, I would absolutely be this left, not creative side, where it would just be, oh, I'll color it the same color as what a brain actually is. But what you're trying to convey here in this intellectual merit section is how you've thought outside the box, right? So how what you're proposing is going to use methods maybe in a creative new way that no one has used them before, how this really is a new thing, original, no one's done it. It's transformative, really. If this works, it's going to change the way people in your field do things. So these are all things you want to think about and explicitly lay out in this section. Again, so a reviewer who reads it automatically understands, yes, I know how this work is new, I know how it's going to contribute to the field, and we absolutely should be doing it. And related to all of that, another thing you want to make sure you're doing is emphasizing how your proposed work is novel. How is it new? Maybe other people in the field have always gone in straight lines with white paper airplanes, and what you're proposing is, you know what, I think we should go sideways and use different colored airplanes. Remember, I told you you'd have to stick with me through some of these picture analogies. But really what you're doing in this section is explicitly laying out, and I'll show some examples later of how you might be able to do this, but you're explicitly laying out how this is new and how no one has done it before. Speaking of examples, this is an excerpt that I pulled from my own GRFP proposal that I've given you on Canvas a couple times at this point for reference. So this is an excerpt from my intellectual merit section. So I will go ahead and read it for us. Again, this proposal was focused on fish eggs, hence the picture of fish eggs. So I'll read it. This research will significantly increase the number of species for which spatial and temporal egg abundances and thus spawning patterns can be determined. These egg abundances will improve fishery-independent biomass estimates of species with visually identical eggs. This will also represent the first study to use suspension bead arrays for marine vertebrate species identification. So if we break this down, this first sentence here, where we're talking about this research will increase the number of species for which we understand these spawning patterns, that's describing how this work, this knowledge is going to contribute to the field. It's adding this new knowledge, right? And then in terms of the implications of this, these egg abundances will improve fishery independent biomass estimates. So you're saying how this is potentially transformative, right? This information is going to improve our knowledge of this topic and change the current biomass estimates that we have. It'll make them even better. And then what I have in bold here, this will represent the first study. So this is that novelty aspect, right? This is the first time that this method of suspension bead arrays will be used for identifying marine vertebrate species like fish eggs. So again, we're emphasizing here, how is this new? How is this different than what has been done before? This is another excerpt from that same proposal. So the way I did it is I had a little blurb affiliated with each of my different aims, so that what I just read on the last slide was associated with aim 1. This blurb here is my intellectual merit statement related to aim 2. It's the same proposal focused on fish eggs though. So what I have written here is that this research will assess the effect marine reserves have on the reproductive success of ecologically important fish species, and it will be the first time eggs of barracuda and white sea bass have been directly quantified within a marine reserve. So here, by stating something like ecologically important fish species, we're making a statement about why this is important for us to focus on these particular species. We're saying they're ecologically important, they have an important role here in the ecosystem. And again, here in bold, we're emphasizing this is the first time that eggs of these particular species will be quantified within the marine reserve. So again, we're explicitly laying out for the reviewer how this proposed work is novel and no one has done it before. So those are some general things you should be including in your intellectual merit section. Now let's go over how you figure out what to rate in that section. And what I would recommend, first of all, is really start with all those background, I had a weird accent there, background papers that you've read. I know you've read a lot of background papers at this point for your topic, so definitely start there and I'll walk us through what specifically to do with those background papers. So the first thing, once you go back, revisit those background papers, the first thing I would recommend focusing on is revisiting your knowledge gap. Remember, that was the very first thing I had us do when we were trying to come up with proposal ideas. I had us identify knowledge gaps. And so that essentially is saying the new knowledge your proposal will generate and why that new knowledge is needed. That essentially is your knowledge gap, and you already have that information because you already thought about it way back when at the beginning of the semester. So that's one thing I would definitely think about, is think again about that knowledge gap that you identified earlier. That's going to help you figure out the new knowledge your proposal is going to contribute. For thinking about this intellectual merit section, I would also encourage you to think about who will use the data you generate and what will they use it for. So maybe it could be the data that you get is going to inform management, similar to the example I used where I said it would improve fishery independent biomass estimates. Those estimates are used to set fishing regulations, for instance. So maybe the data you generate will inform management. Maybe it will inform conservation. So think about who will be using your data, how will it be applied? That's another way to make a case for why your work is important, transformative, new, how it will contribute to the field. And related to everything else, think about how is your proposal different than what has been done before? And there are a couple different suggestions or things I have to think about that might help you answer this question or fill this particular gap. So one of the ways your proposal might be different than what's been done before, maybe you're sampling previously unstudied populations. So say this is a sampling map, and say all of the dots in black were sites that had been sampled before. They'd already done molecular work there. Maybe in your proposal, you are focusing on these new sites in the colored dots. So that can be an example, or that is an example of how your proposed work is different than what's been done before. You're contributing knowledge about these new sites that haven't been investigated yet. Another potential way your proposal could be different than what's been done before is if you're using new genetic methods to expand our knowledge of previously studied populations or species. So maybe people have been studying these populations or this particular species for a while, but maybe usually they use microsatellite markers or something like that, and you are proposing something to use high throughput sequencing. So this new technology we've been talking about all semester, right? Maybe your contribution, how this proposal is different, is it's building on that previous knowledge by using newer, up-to-date technology to give us even more fine-scale information about the system that you are focusing on. So if we summarize all of this and think about all the proposal components we've talked about to date, so here we just added this intellectual merit section. This is everything we've already talked about so far. That was all in your proposal too. We just added this intellectual merit section, and really there's only one mini section left, which is the broader impacts, which I'll cover in the next video. So really we're stacking on here, and we're really very close to making that final block at the top, and I'll cover the broader impacts in the next video.